So we're going to talk about why banning corporate contributions is the next step that MCCE and the league are taking in this area. We'll run through a little bit about what the bill, is and does, and then we're going to pause there for some questions and discussions, and we can talk through the policy and why we're taking this approach. If you've got questions about how it would impact different kinds of candidates or any of that type of thing. And then we'll switch a little bit to talking about not just the what and the why, but the how, our strategy for actually getting this bill passed and ways that you all can get involved in helping us get to that victory. So we'll have some couple spaces for conversation. If you have a question come up as we go, feel free to stick it in the chat. When we get to the question and answer period, we can pull stuff from the chat, and also happy to have folks just speak up and ask your questions as well. But if you're, think you might forget it or something you want us to like pause and define, feel free to stick that in the chat. I probably should say, sometimes I assume that people know who I am because I recognize so many of your names, but I should actually start out by introducing myself, and then our other speakers can introduce themselves as they get going. But I'm Anna Keller. I'm the executive director for Maine Citizens for Clean Elections and the League of Women Voters of Maine. I've been working on campaign finance reform since I was hired as an organizer on the Clean Elections campaign in 2014, which while I feel like that makes me a veteran of this, I know that I'm in company of people who have been working on this for more than 20 years. But I'm really excited about this campaign, and I'm looking forward to talking to you about our strategy when we get there. But first, I'm going to turn it over to Will Hayward, who is going to talk a bit about why corporate contributions.
Thanks, Anna, and hi everyone. So great to be here with all of you this evening.
All these youngsters.
And my name is Will Hayward, and I am the Advocacy Program Coordinator for the League of Women Voters and Maine Citizens for Clean Elections. I should probably switch that order, but it's just so automatic for me to do all of these introductions with all these titles. But it's so great to be here and get to tell you about what we're looking to do on corporate contributions. So let me just start by running through a little bit of the problem with corporate contributions in Maine. So first off, I think it's very useful to say out front and outright that Maine really is a campaign finance leader. We lead the nation in so many aspects when it comes to giving voters a voice and running clean and fair elections. For example, we have the Maine Clean Elections Act, which allows individuals to run for public office without relying on private donations. And over the years, we've had so many candidates run with clean elections campaigns instead of private ones. So really, in some very important ways, Maine is a leader on campaign finance. But one area that we are not a leader on is corporate contributions. So corporate contributions to political candidates have been banned at the federal level since 1908, I believe, and they're also banned in 22 other states. So this is an issue area we think that Maine can really take a big step forward on if we want to continue seeing ourselves as a leader in campaign finance. One of the big problems is that corporate contributions can have a distorting effect on policy. Corporations have a unique ability to aggregate lots of wealth under the control of a small number of people, and corporations can use political contributions to tip the playing field in their favor. They can really, have an outsized weight in setting the policy agenda, in what gets discussed, what gets prioritized, and so we think that we think a corporate contribution ban is an important start to taking that on. Corporations can outweigh individual voters. We're going to see some graphs that I'll show in a minute that show that corporations do make up a significant portion of all political contributions in Maine, and when you consider how few people are the ones in corporations that are making these decisions, you really see the outsized influence that they have. corporate contributions can harm faith in democracy. There's been some nationwide polling about voters not having faith that working class people's voices are properly heard in our government, and we think that getting corporate contributions out of the political system is an important step to helping restore voter faith in democracy. So I'm going to show you a couple of graphs that just illustrate what this issue looked like this year, in 2020. And then after that, I will hand it over to John to talk about what exactly we are proposing. So as you can see here, I have a graph of corporate contributions by legislative chamber. And as you can see, these numbers have ticked up significantly between 2018 and 2020, both in the Maine Senate and the Maine House. Another one is, this is for leadership PACs, which is a type of PAC that is controlled by one legislator. And so for these, you can see that the total number of contributions to these PACs was around 300,000 in both 2018 and 2020. And that of that, roughly 1/3 is corporations. So that's a significant portion of the money going to these as being is corporate and commercial money, which can have this influence. And likewise with caucus PACs. So these are PACs that are controlled by the caucuses of each party in each chamber of the House. You can see that a significant portion of this funding was derived from corporate sources as well. So so these graphs are just to illustrate that corporate money in Maine politics is a real thing, and a real thing that we think we can take on this year. So with that brief introduction of the issue, I want to hand it over to John Brodigham to discuss our solution a bit more.
Thank you, Will. It's good to see a lot of friends and folks who have been engaged with this issue over the years, and some new folks as well. Our proposal is in the form of legislation that will be coming up before too long in the legislature. Likely it'll be referred to the Committee on Veterans and Legal Affairs. And our approach is simply to bring Maine in line with some of the other systems around the country. We'll refer to 22 other states that ban corporate contributions to legislative candidates and gubernatorial candidates within those states, and of course the federal system. So we would simply extend that ban to candidates for the state legislature and for governor in all elections going forward in Maine. So contributions directly to those candidates' campaigns would be prohibited. Now, right now, the clean election candidates do not accept any corporate contributions, even as seed money or, of course, qualifying contributions. So they're already sort of completely disconnected from the corporate contribution world. But this would mean that all candidates would be subject to that prohibition on corporate contributions. This refers to contributions directly from the corporate treasury, and I'll elaborate on that in a second. But it's important to note that this is money of the corporation itself, not necessarily people associated with the corporation or employed by the corporation. The prohibition would also apply to PACs that are controlled by legislators. So any political action committee that's controlled by a legislator or a legislative candidate, and that would include what's commonly referred to as leadership PACs and caucus PACs. Leadership PACs are political action committees that are usually controlled by one legislator who is aspiring to run for leadership within the caucus, within the legislature. And caucus PACs, of course, are controlled by the political parties within the legislature, one for each of the major parties in the House and one for each of the major parties in the Senate. Since the legislators are closely involved with those types of political action committees, the ban would also apply to them. Corporations would not be able to give, and these kinds of committees would not be able to accept contributions from corporations. It also has an effect of prohibiting corporate contributions to any other political action committees that in turn make contributions to candidates, so that corporations can give money to any committee that only makes independent expenditures without any kind of coordination with a candidate or without giving directly to a candidate. So that kind of a committee would be able to accept contributions from corporations, and corporations would also be able to organize a separate fund for the corporation's employees, customers, shareholders to contribute to that fund from their own resources, not from the corporate general fund, treasury fund resources. And this would be considered a separate segregated fund, and this is very similar to what's done on the federal level currently. It also would put contribution limits on all types of contributions to leadership PACs. So no single contributor can give $10,000 to a leadership PAC controlled by a single candidate at a time when they couldn't give more than $850 to that candidate in their campaign directly. So we would apply that $850 contribution limit to the fundraising by the person's political action committee that they control. And so in general, I would say that this approach does sever the ties between legislators and corporations, many of them lobbying directly in the legislature frequently throughout the tenure of a legislator who's successful in the election, and with a strong, very specific interest often that they are asking that legislator to weigh in on after they've made a contribution. This would just simply end that practice. And the value of this is that it's a reminder, as Will said, although we have a very good system with clean elections, we do have some unfinished business, and this serves as a reminder that this is part of our democracy, and it's that the people themselves should be setting the agenda for our state government and state policymakers.
Do folks have questions about the policy and what we're doing? And we're happy to, or thoughts as comments, all good.
The question has to do with, are there other ways to promote sort of transparency and honesty without limiting donations? It has proven historically extremely difficult to limit donations. It's it also I think might somehow weaken the candidate's position relative to all these various PACs and pressure groups. Maybe if we just let everybody give as much money as they wanted to the candidate and make sure that the candidate has records of who gave what, that might solve the problem. I'm not grinding an axe. I'm asking a question.
Well, let me just try to jump in and take a stab at that. It's a good question. Appreciate it, Bruce. We're certainly all in favor of transparency and honesty, and everything should be completely disclosed on campaign finance reports, no matter whether it's $50 or whether it's a much larger amount, and whether it's a candidate or whether it's a PAC. We definitely believe in that. But what we have seen is that, particularly over time, individual candidates who start out perhaps with the best of intentions and the greatest connection with their community, over time, the easy availability of campaign contributions, large contributions sometimes, and sometimes contributions from vested interests, tends to pull those candidates and those legislators away from their constituency. And the first line of defense on this, of course, is the political system, and transparency and accountability, and speaking about the allegiance of the legislator to their constituents. But when this becomes a phenomenon that's so widespread and deeply ingrained and lasts for such a long period of time, it's extremely difficult to combat it without raising this issue periodically. And frankly, that's really what we're doing here, is lifting up this issue. And we don't think this will cut off funds or starve campaigns of resources, but it will redirect them towards the people that the candidates represent or hope to represent.
I always like to think of it as we don't necessarily have a problem with money in politics. We know that it takes money to run campaigns, but it's a matter of who's giving that money and what they're getting in return for it. And so when we think about corporations and corporate contributions, or really any contributor that can have an outsized influence as compared to the average voter, that's when we start to have a problem with it. And so that's, as you could see from the charts that Will had shared earlier on, we're getting at a significant, but certainly not every bit of the funding that's going to those entities. Karen, I saw that you've got your hand up.
Yes, hi. Does this bill have a number yet? And is it in committee at this time?
I love the practical questions. Thank you, Karen. So it does not have a number yet. It has not yet been printed. And so the bill sponsor is Senator Louis Lucchini from Hancock County. He's from Ellsworth. And he is actually the chair of the Veterans and Legal Affairs Committee that it's going to go in front of. And when he gets his bill back from the revisor's office with the final language, it'll get its title and it'll get its LD number at that point, when it'll be a little easier to track. And often we don't start talking about bills until they're in that stage, but because this is a big priority for us and we know there's a lot of work to be done to get it ready, we're out here talking about it even in its sort of abstract current shape. But it will go to Veterans and Legal Affairs. It'll have a public hearing there. We'll have to fight to keep it in its strongest form coming out of the committee before it'll have its full votes.
Well, this is Ellery Keene. Can you hear me?
Yeah, thanks, Ellery.
I think Maine has done well. I did run for the House of Representatives of Maine a number of years ago, and I was able to go around and talk to people and get $5 contributions and qualify for a state program that would see that I had enough money to run a good election. And that's a good thing that Maine does. I don't think all the states do that. Shelley Pingree was strongly in favor of that. And she was for a while working in Washington to try to make that sort of thing happen in other states. But I do know that some people who are in touch with the right corporate people would rather just go and ask them for money than do what I described. Can someone help me understand this?
Yeah, it's great that you were able to run as a clean elections candidate. And it was my experience when I ran. John served in the legislature was able to use that system. I think Representative Dodge, you had gotten to do it as well. Maybe others of you have been able to run, but it's a system that puts you as the candidate really much more in touch with the average voter in your district, because you have to get those small contributions, and most people are potential contributors in that sense, as well as potential voters. And there aren't very many states that have a program like this. It's just Maine, Connecticut, and Arizona that have it at the state level. And it's interesting that you mentioned what Shelley Pingree was working on in Washington, because we are seeing it come up at the federal level. Some of you have noticed that we've been talking a lot with the League and MCCE lately about HR 1 and some of the reforms that are possible at the federal level right now. But there is in HR 1, the For the People Act, that's this big democracy reform package at the federal level. It includes small donor-based public funding program like Maine's Clean Elections program for federal candidates. And there's a very real chance that it could pass. So that's a really exciting development, that we could end up having clean elections for our federal races as well. The sort of other half of the story, and the reason why we're talking corporate contributions and why it's still an issue despite Maine having clean elections, is that not every candidate uses clean elections. It has to be a voluntary system. So some people choose to raise their money through private contributions. There's the PAC issue, where there's many fewer limits, but still direct influence over legislators. And of course, there's the outside spending end, which is much harder to get at in terms of what corporations spend directly on issues and in elections. But this is, I think, a good transition for me into sort of the strategy here, is that we're thinking that the corporate contribution ban gets at a very difficult to get at sweet spot for campaign finance reform, in that it is getting at a real source of funding that is a significant amount of money. It is a source that is a potential source of corruption and influence. It is something that is constitutional. We actually can do this without it immediately getting struck down by the courts. And that there's a pretty strong consensus around the public that this is a problem that they'd like to see a solution to. We have been trying different approaches over the last few years to try to get at how do we put restrictions on the pieces of this political system that clean elections doesn't take care of. And we have looked at lobbyist contributions. We worked on that hard in the last session, and we were able to make some progress, but not as much as we wanted in that area. But going at corporations, who in many cases are the ones who are funding the lobbyists and some of the sources of that money, is sort of a cleaner way for us to get there. So, like I said, we want to make sure that as we talk to legislators about this reform, that we're showing them that it is clearly getting at a piece of this problem of big money in politics, that it is constitutional, and that it's going to have a real impact. And so we are still refining our messaging around that, but hopefully we are getting that across to legislators, that this is something that is meaningful and realistic. We want to lead with the positive. One of the things that is really hard to do when talking about this area is to not constantly be in everything's terrible. There is so much corruption, our representatives are terrible, they don't listen to us, and to be in that space. But that space, even though sometimes anger is very motivating, it's a space that gets people to think that nothing can be done. They either get, angry and want to overthrow the system, or they get turned off from it entirely. And a lot of legislators, even if though they're, I would not call them apathetic to the system at large, do kind of feel like, why even try to do campaign finance reform? It's so complicated. It's going to get in there somewhere. It's all kind of, I don't know if we're going to be able to get anything done here. And we hear that from people. So we want to lead with, this is really possible. This has been done in 22 other states. It's getting at a significant amount of money here in Maine, but not so significant that it's going to completely cripple everyone's ability to run an effective campaign. like I said, sweet spot there. And that this is really possible. So that's sort of some of the messaging that we're trying to get across here. The other pieces of this strategy is that we need to have a big coalition. Because if we're going to ask people who are in power, who are elected under the system where they got the benefit of corporate contributions, because it went to both parties, the current legislative leadership and the governor raised money from corporations, and we're asking them to change the system that got them into power. So if we're doing that, even if many of them know that it's not a great system, they'd rather not have to be doing this, we need to show them that people really want it. And that when they go out and say, you know what, we banned corporate contributions this year, that people are going to really appreciate that and hold them accountable for having really done it if they say that they're going to. And so, like with so many issues, grassroots pressure from their constituents, from their voters, is going to be really important here. And that means not just the members of the league and the MCCE folks, but building a really broad coalition, because money in politics touches on so many other issues that no matter what you want to get done in Augusta, it is impeded if corporations are calling the shots, not the voters, if you can't actually access your representatives and get your message across. So we know that everything from clean water to lower prescription drug prices to a fairer tax code, to supporting small businesses, to utility reform, to recycling, to, you know, like there's so many things that all of those issues are going to be made easier if corporations have less power to set the agenda in Augusta. So we need to build a big coalition. And we're working with many of the partners that we are able to work with throughout the election cycle, and some folks who have been with us in the past. But we want to build a big tent here. And we want to make sure, like I said, educating the public, building grassroots support. So that goes to the how can you get involved, and how can we get all of this strategy done. And for that, I'm going to turn it over to Lane, our organizer, who is the person on our team who constantly is telling us, that's a great idea, but when are we going to do it? And who's going to get that done?
Thanks, Anna. Hey everyone, so I'm Lane Sturdivant. My pronouns are they, them. As Anna said, I'm an organizer with Democracy Maine, so Maine Citizens for Clean Elections and League of Women Voters of Maine. And I have here some bullet points that we came up with of different things that you can do to get involved. If you've been listening so far this info session and you're kind of getting excited about this, you're saying, oh wow, 22 other states already have it, we could have it, yeah. You know, the first thing is to contact your legislators and let them know that you as a constituent support this, that you're interested in this. Maine is a small enough state in terms of population that our legislators do really, I think, they are really accessible to their constituents. So, you know, however you've contacted them in the past, you know, if you happen to know their preferred method, if it's a phone call or an email, if you want to reach out to them on this issue, you could also write a letter to the editor, which, you know, in support to get the word out in newspapers across the state. You could prepare testimony for the public hearing when it will come in front of the committee. And you can, you know, recruit other friends to contact their legislators or prepare testimony or do any of these other things. You can also connect with other issue groups and organizations that are sort of working on this in similar ways. And then finally, if you really want to get into the weeds, you can join our Money in Politics team, where we kind of debate and talk about the strategy and all the various ins and outs of this bill and how we're going to get it passed. But I want to pause here and share my screen because I think it's a little bit more interactive than the bullet point list here. I'm going to take you to our league webpage. Some of you might be familiar with this. This is the League of Women Voters of Maine, lwvme.org. And you might have signed up for this very event by going to our events page over here on the far right, the tab over here. Your videos might be in front of it, but you can always move those. There's other tabs though, and the tab that I want to show you is Get Involved. And there's a couple drop down things. You can, contact us to volunteer. You can look for your local leagues. But the one that I want to show you tonight is this Take Action tab. So if you go to Take Action, it's bright, it's colorful. You can scroll down and you can see several of our legislative priorities. So tonight we're talking about the corporate contribution ban, but we also have, online voter registration. We were just talking about the national popular vote, if any of you were on that call at 5:30. And we've got a few other things here too. So if you click on corporate contribution ban, you get a little bit of the blurb that we've been talking about tonight, why we're trying to pass this, why it matters in Maine. And if you click on the learn more here, it actually takes you to Maine Citizens for Clean Elections, which has a couple more, that you can get to the data. If you want to go back and look at what Will showed us, you can, get some more information about it. But that's the Maine Citizens for Clean Election webpage. You can dive deeper. Back on the league webpage, you can contact your legislator through the webpage here. If you put in your information and then you hit start writing, it'll come up with a template for an email that you can send to your legislator in support of the corporate contribution ban. We've already written you some language that you can utilize, and you can make it your own. You can personalize it if you know particular things about your legislator, or if there are particular points about the corporate contribution ban that you really want to emphasize, you can write your own, or you can sort of adhere to the template as much as you want. So that is really one of the simpler things that you can do, is just take a few minutes to call your legislator or to write this email and send it to them. Again, it's helpful that they know what their constituents care about. And I think if you've ever had an interaction with your legislator, hopefully you've come away with that impression. I know I'm always calling my legislators about all sorts of things. And then the final thing I want to share, and we'll maybe take questions after if we have extra time, is we've made, let me pull up the tab. We've made a handy Google form that we're gonna give you. I can throw it into the chat, and then we can also send it in a follow-up email so that you have it. Yes, you want to get involved. Sort of that's the optimistic title here, right? You've heard the pitch and now you want to do something. And this way you can fill this out and give us your information, how you came to learn about tonight's information session so that we know, how are we reaching you? Are you getting this from an email or otherwise? But also, like, what do you want to do? Do you want to contact your legislators? Do you have other ideas? This is where we're really looking for folks to give us, what else do you think we should be doing? What else do you want to be doing? Did you have questions that we didn't get to tonight? Why do you care about banning corporate contributions? What is, are you ready to talk to your state legislator? Maybe you're not the right person, but maybe you are the right person to talk to your representative. You might have a slightly different dynamic or relationship depending on what district you're in, and anything else you might want to tell us. So this will give us a sense of not only what people want to do to help get this passed, but also how we can support volunteers in this effort. So, we're ready. If you want to write a letter to the editor and you're just not quite sure where to start, we're ready to help you. And we're ready to work with volunteers to try to get the word out in various ways. So that Google form will give you, I'll throw it into the chat here, but we'll give it to you in an email as well. We're hoping that you can fill that out. If you've listened tonight and you've gotten excited about getting involved, this is sort of the easiest way to sort of jump on board. And if you're not going to fill that out, I would recommend at least going to the web page and learning more about the issue, and then deciding for yourself, okay, what other questions do I have? Now I can go back and ask this of Maine Citizens for Clean Elections and get more information before I maybe take a stand here, or maybe before I contact my legislator. But this is a handy tool for us to track some of the impact that we might be having. So that said, I think it's 6:42, and I don't know if you have anything else for the agenda. We want to take questions.
Yeah, I think we can take more questions and continue to have a conversation. I do want to just add on that piece about how contacting your legislator is really just the most important thing, including in this early stage of the campaign, because we need to know who is enthusiastically with us so that we can loop them into the effort. We need to know who has questions. We need to know who is skeptical. All of this will help us then tailor our approach to each legislator. This bill may come down to a pretty close floor vote at the end of the day. And so we are going to have to be very prepared to talk to all the legislators. So even if you think, oh, of course my legislator supports this, like, it's still a good idea to let them know. It's nice for legislators when they hear about things that they can be like, yes, I support it. And then you can be happy together. But it also lets us know who we want to reach out to. We're going to be needing co-sponsors for the bill. And so all of that is really helpful. And then as we figure out where we have those gaps and legislators that we need to work on, we'll be able to strategize about, okay, well, who do we all know in that person, in that person's district who could reach out to them and help continuing to work with them. So doing that on the early end is important. And please, if you hear back from your legislator, let us know. You can get back in touch with us either to Lane, or you can just email advocacy@mainecleanelections.org or lwvme.org, and you'll get us that way too. So that way we can keep track of who we need to keep working on. And then I did want to say, in terms of where do we go from here beyond sending you all off to fill out the form and do this work, is that we are going to be having sort of check-in calls about the campaign periodically. We kind of get a sense as we go how frequently it makes sense to do things like this. But we're also going to be continuing our education effort. So I want to highlight for you that we are going to be having a call on Thursday night, which is not about the corporate contribution ban, but about a related money and politics issue that we're working on at the Portland level, where, as you might know, there's been an effort to have a referendum for a clean elections municipal funding system at the Portland level. The Portland City Council chose not to put it on the ballot, and so Fair Elections Portland sued. And so John, who spoke to us earlier, and Ben Gaines, another board member who's been leading that, they've been leading that legal argument in front of the Maine Supreme Court last week, are going to do a debrief and talk to us about the Portland issues and how those impact the potential for reform efforts around the state. So that's on Thursday. And then in a couple of weeks, we're going to be having a panel on healthcare with some folks working on healthcare reform, talking about how corporate contributions, the health insurance industry and pharmaceutical companies, how all of that plays into the efforts to get more affordable, more accessible, quality healthcare for people. So that's going to be a good conversation following in the train of the webinars that we've had previously on the environment and tax policy, and getting to see how no matter what is the issue that gets you really excited, there is a connection to the corporate money in there. So we'll be, of course, sending everyone emails and keeping you all up to date about those things. But there's going to be opportunities to keep learning and engaging on those issues as well. Questions or thoughts?
It's been very interesting to hear what you have to say. I was part of that original Clean Elections campaign program that we went through. In fact, I always thought it was so brilliant the way we came up with that name. How could anybody refuse not to want to support something like that? But I have to say that when I ran for state legislature, I did not use the money, and I went on my own way, and I lost. But then I had $5,000 or $6,000 left over, which I was delighted, because I was then able to turn around and give that money to the Maine Community College system for scholarships. So it was a very nice way to use the money. But one of the things I wanted to be sure I understood correctly with what you're trying to do now, this would take the money from a corporation out of, let's say, if I had gone to one, which I didn't, I went to All Friends, but it would have taken the money out. They could not have given it to me directly. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so that's one of the things we're trying to work on. And the second would be, would that be the same for a governor's race in the state of Maine?
Yep, it would be for directly for the candidate campaigns for state legislature or for governor, and it would also apply to when there are the political action committees that are controlled by legislators, the leadership PACs or the caucus PACs. They wouldn't be able to accept corporate contributions either.
So, I mean, they, as we all know, they can maybe find other ways, but at least it makes it more difficult. But the other thing I would say is about, I have many friends that have been in the legislature, and I said, well, you know, what do you think about all the lobbyists? I remember Betsy Sweet, when we were working on it originally, saying, you know, you're going to know about me in the public, because now I'm going to pay, and I'm willing to pay more money for you to know that I'm a lobbyist. So you kind of kick in on kind of the work that they're doing. But one of the legislators said to me long ago, and I think it's probably pretty true, they said that the lobbyists at least come to the legislators far more prepared. They know what they're talking about. You may not agree with it, but you get far more information from them than you do from just the lay people in the community. So I think, and another legislator, he was a governor, Angus said to me once, he said, you know, Jana, I'll always answer a call immediately from a corporation. He said, but that doesn't mean anything as to, in terms of whether I am going to take what they say and do anything with it. But yes, if I get a $10,000 contribution directly, I am going to respond to that person immediately, or as soon as I can. But he said it has nothing to do. And the other legislators that I talked to, Anna, pretty much said the same thing. They will listen because they're getting that information, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to pay any attention to it. But I am still for this. I would be happy to get anything out of politics if we can help it, of the money. Any way to make it more difficult for people to do it. So, but I just wanted to be sure I understood who it would specifically affect, because I think that's important to know.
We hear that quite a bit from legislators, and and no disrespect to Senator King or anyone else who's in that position, but I think when we talk about influence, it's often really subtle. It's not,
Yes.
Quid pro quo. It's not, oh, I gave you this money, I expect you to vote this way.
No.
It's not about that.
Right.
It's about who gets to get their point across. And because whether you think you agree with it or not, you've heard that person's side of the story in a way that you might not have gotten that long conversation with someone else. They probably got some information back in terms of just understanding where the legislator is on things, that kind of access. And when we talk about agenda setting and access, it's subtle, but that's a lot of how the influence travels. And I think the other piece is that one that we like to emphasize is not, so there's actual influence and the problems there, but there's also the perception of influence. And with the Supreme Court has said we can regulate campaign finance when it's about preventing corruption or the appearance of corruption, because in the democracy we live in, public faith in our elected officials is so important. And when people feel like their legislators are being influenced, that is a harm that's done to the system, even if the legislator wasn't actually influenced. And so sometimes when legislators say to me, I've never been influenced, I would say, okay, I believe you. I'm not saying you are corrupt, but think about how it looks to one of your voters to see that you're taking this money. Does that make them feel like they could trust you? And so when that sort of getting into the, back into sort of the outside of the state house perspective on it is really important, and something I think that constituents can help, reconnect to their legislators about. I'm a registered lobbyist, so are Will and John. We're not against lobbyists. We just think that lobbyists shouldn't be able to, use contributions to make their points weigh a little heavier. They can, we can argue on the merits of the issues.
Just wondering if you had speakers that could come and speak to, say, our Waldo County Democrats meeting. I think somebody is going to come and talk about the national popular vote, which we're really thrilled about. But but this would be another very welcome topic for one of our meetings.
Absolutely, we'd be happy to do that. Will you, when you fill out the form, will you write that down kind of in the other things or groups we should connect with? And that way I'll make sure that we remember to follow up with you, but that would be great.
I had one more comment while people are thinking if that's appropriate. And I like to salute and thank, Jana and Jan and everybody else here who has put themselves out and tried to run for office or supported people running for office. This is certainly not to make it harder for them. And it's important work, and it's hard enough to do as it is. And thank you for what you've done. The only other point I would make is that there are a million ways for a corporation to express itself in the political world. Corporations can take out independent expenditures. They can make endorsements. They can, talk to their employees. They can talk to their customers. They can support candidates or political parties. They can donate money to all kinds of things. There's a lot of different ways that corporations can engage in the political process. Of course, they can hire lobbyists to be in the State House. So this is just really one small part of the corporation sort of political expression that's being dealt with here. And there are a lot of ways where corporations can and should and do weigh in on policymaking in the state.
That's a really good point. And it's that nexus of the intersection of directly connecting money and access to the individual legislator that or to the PAC that they control that we particularly want to challenge.
Thank you, John, for that comment. I just want to tell you what a joy it is to serve, and I appreciate very much the Maine Clean Elections process. I have used the process both for the 129th and the 130th, and I hope that this bill will be successful. I hope that you folks are planning, as you assess who's with you and who isn't, how to address those folks who are not willing to do this. Mm-hmm. I got a sense from my constituents in House District 97, Belfast, Northport, and Waldo, that this was something that they sort of expected and very much appreciated, that I made the decision to run clean elections.
That is great to hear. And I'm glad that you had that positive experience and that it was reflected, back at you with your constituents. I want to thank you all so much for spending an hour of your evening with us. It's really great to see you here and have this conversation. Hopefully it's the beginning of the process that gets us to this reform and all of the things that we need to see. Please remember to fill out the form. even if you're not quite sure how you want to engage yet, it's still really helpful for us to know kind of what resonated with you tonight and how you found this event. And contact, if you're gonna do one thing, contact your legislator, whether you do it independently or with the email form that Lane showed you, and let us know what your legislators have to say.